It's a pilot.
Okay. I would like to welcome myself here.
Welcome back to Absolute Podcast with Georgiy and Josh. We don't even have a name. Do we have a show title?
I don't know. Absolute webcast?
Absolute and You, a podcast.
So, welcome everybody. My name is Georgiy. This is the Absolute Podcast. I'm bringing you a guest today, a very special guest that happens to have a business that he no longer works for. And
The best kind of business.
introducing Josh.
Hello, I'm
Hi.
Josh. I'm a 25-year vet of eCommerce, burgeoning AI entrepreneur, and currently a solutions architect at Absolute Web.
Cool. That's where we are right now.
It is. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you. Well, today I would like to ask you a few questions and see if we can get our heads around the entire landscape of AI and kind of see if we can gather insight into some of the changes that are happening to the industry and maybe some of the things that you could have had if only Sam Altman was there for you 10 years ago and what that might have done for your business. So let's intro you. Who
Okay.
are you?
All right. Again, my name is Josh. I started my own agency in 1998, digital design and marketing agency, much like Absolute.
1 year before us, too,
In fact,
might I
yeah,
add.
a precursor. I was able to build that agency into more of a boutique-facing firm. We didn't have aspirations that we do here at Absolute with a large accoutrement of developers and designers, but we did have fantastic clientele. Clients like the Miami Heat, Norwegian Cruise Lines, Carnival Cruise Lines, and we did a lot towards the end of my tenure there. We did a lot with social media, handling personal celebrity brands like Dwayne Wade, Udonis Haslem. Again, a lot of work with the Heat. In that time, I was able to develop a lot of different applications, mobile apps, and work within that social media framework, which spawned a secondary company called Radar, which was a social media sentiment and tracking tool that ultimately would have benefited from AI at the time. And then during that time frame, actually incubated a direct-to-consumer brand called Ella Paradis, which we later grew into an Inc. 500 sized organization. And I recently left there to join the team here at Absolute.
Great intro. Dwayne Wade. I've heard him before. Sounds very familiar.
Well,
Does he do football?
he does basketball for your Miami Heat. And the challenge with Dwayne is that he was one of the really, I'd say, middle tier celebrities on social media. We grew his platform footprint from around 16 million users to over 38 million in a couple of years, where we would have been able to leverage a lot of technology, specifically with AI, is in sentiment tracking. So listening to the consumers or his fan base, identifying opportunities to do direct outreach, talk to those people individually, take the temperature on maybe programs and things that he was doing. Recently, he's had a lot of exposure and discussion around his daughter, who is transgender. And these are the types of programs that we would put into place to handle things in order to ensure that his message is on brand, but also reaching his intended audience.
I gotcha. So with sentiment analysis, are we just talking about figuring out if, people are responding to specific, I guess, events related to his brand online and whether those are positive or negative, neutral? Or are we talking about maybe analysis-driven sentiment that may provide recommendations and maybe gaps in areas where there might be kind of growing interest, maybe not factored into maybe positive or negative or neutral, but something that might give him insight or other businesses insight into essentially where they may expand, right?
Sure.
Gaps in their branding and kind of campaigns.
Ultimately, we're talking about both, right? I mean, there are opportunities that you can dive into each one. Take this example. For a hotel, they have a guest who's at their poolside, and the guest is upset that their appetizer and their drink haven't arrived within, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes. they put that sentiment out on social media, like Twitter, for example. And if the hotelier is using AI to monitor their tweets, they can understand by looking at the geolocated information within that tweet that they have a guest on premise who's upset. An AI could then trigger a series of events to either reach out directly to the hotel staff or actually place a complimentary order for something additional and have that delivered with compliments to the hotel. So you're looking at not only understanding what's happening on premise, but then having some sort of a routine that could assuage that and turn a brand detractor into a brand champion.
That sounds something. That sounds like something similar to some of the previous AI tools that have already existed. For example, for fraud, this is something that looks at analysis of many, many different transactions on the internet and can actually bucket people into safe versus potentially malicious cohorts. And perhaps this individual was a real customer, but perhaps it was a troll, right? Perhaps it was a bot. And AI, at least in the past, would have been able to make this association, look at history of posts. This is also something that is similarly done in a lot of review aggregation websites for online purchases and communities and stuff like that. So that's where we've, I guess that's the tech that we've already had access to for some time now. Systems for fraud like Signified, systems for review analysis like Review Meta. But something recently has arrived that has kind of upended the industry and given us a lot more than just tools that are very niche, right, to specific business cases, something that is more broad and generally applicable to quite a bit more.
Sure.
Do you know
Perhaps
what
you're
I'm talking
talking
about?
ChatGPT.
Yes, I
So
am.
the emergence of ChatGPT, which is a more of a layman's methodology of accessing a large type of AI. It's not a neural network, but actually a learning-based mechanism where it has access to just almost an infinite amount of data, where it can do language selection and precursors for questions. Is actually readily usable for just about anyone who can type or dictate out a question. A lot of people are using it now to streamline their workflows, where it's taking the best practices from industries across the board and applying them, whether it's through a Six Sigma framework or an OKR framework. You can begin to really ask the technology a question, and within a frame time reference right now of around 2021, receive an answer that's appropriate and is based on a melange of activities.
There's this memory I have, someone who I have some admiration for, who once said, if we were invaded by aliens, and they had come and they had the capability to speak in our language, the first thing that he would ask would be, what do I need to know? And it feels like ChatGPT is that alien. It is that thing that you can ask, what do I need to know? Granted, you need to provide a little bit more context, but it's different from normal search. It's different from what we've had access to in the past, and this capability to kind of complement gaps in knowledge is really kind of one of its killer features, the ability to know what you're missing, because there is this kind of group of, I guess, knowledge paradigms where you know what you know, you don't know what you don't know, you know what you don't know, right? But the thing that you don't know is what you don't know, right? That last one. And
I believe I follow you.
and it's something that I use in my day-to-day to really fill in the gaps in kind of an idea or a plan or some kind of methodology that I have, and I see others using it in a similar capacity. And I think it's only really just beginning. I think that's not a very uncommon thought that people have. So I wanted to segue this conversation into perhaps what you may have been able to use something like ChatGPT for, in your previous business, right? What are some of the areas where you see that it could have applied and could have helped quite a bit?
There's actually a lot of predictive technologies and resources that you can apply, whether that's talking to a customer about things in their warehouse, or more specifically, resource planning that you may have for upcoming project load. You can actually use it to chart out a basic course of action for agency growth. If you're haven't attended business school, or perhaps you're not very attuned to the ways of raising capital, you can actually request an outline. What are the steps that I can do? Where can I go to find funding? And a tool like ChatGPT can fill in that framework where you, as you mentioned, it might be a gap in knowledge. Additionally, if you have a strong penchant for particular activities, you can utilize it as a tool to actually cut down your workload. So, for example, there may be a routine type of activity of which you can programmatically handle through an AI application, which can write basic code and do a routine based on a description. So instead of you belaboring over a certain formulaic routine or loop or what have you, you can actually provide a very detailed description in common terms and have ChatGPT write out a code routine in your selected language, whether that's Liquid for Shopify or PHP or even C.
Speaking of Liquid for Shopify, this morning we had a little bit of an emergency with the client. You may be familiar.
I was familiar.
And we had to kind of show a little bit more progress because it's difficult to sometimes from an agency perspective for non-technical clients show the breadth of work that was done on the back end because really client-facing stuff is really just a segment of the total productivity for a particular project. Some deliverables just aren't visible, right? And we had to make some of those deliverables visible, right? Just to assuage the client and make sure that they understood that we were on track and they were in good hands. And in the past, situations like this where I have like 30 minutes to solve some very specific problems, right?
Oh, right.
Yeah, save bacon, whatever. Help a team member out. There's stuff that can be done, but you'd have to take quite a bit of shortcuts, right? And with something like ChatGPT, I knew what I needed to do. I had a representation of what I needed to do. This is, slightly technical, but I asked it what I needed. It was wrong, but I corrected it where I looked up a single piece of documentation, whereas in the past I would have had to spend 5 or 10 minutes looking at documentation. I spent 1 minute looking at some documentation. The code that it wrote was mostly correct, quickly fixed, and then we had a working demo. And then from there, I had another problem where I needed to take some text and then associate a customer with a particular building, right? That was not particularly straightforward. And same story, I had it write Liquid for me that did the mapping. We used Shopify Flow to automatically take the customer notes that were filled in on registration and associate them with the building that they needed to be on. And in the past, something like that may have taken me 35, 40 minutes, maybe longer, depending on how many problems I ran into. And with something like ChatGPT, it's 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then I spent more time tweaking the arrow in the dropdown than I did actually.
But let's be clear,
solving that
you're also
problem.
a power user, not only of ChatGPT, but of Shopify. What's really interesting, you're describing is a hybrid model where you're able to espouse the problem at hand, guide the application, or in this case, the AI, into providing a solution that you think you already have a framework for, and then having it do the heavy lifting, and even the QA. Actually, you can have it go through and adjust the code for any irregularities. Where some of this is going is that the marriage between the human interaction and the AI interaction is going to become a very tricky slope in some cases. You can't just leave AI of its own accord. You mentioned that the code was wrong in this case, but there's inherent bias. There are things that we need to be accountable for. There always needs to be some sort of an oversight for certain aspects of AI output, and those things are still being thought of and developed, and how could we actually monitor this? But with the change and growth of the trajectory of all of these tools, whether it's Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or ChatGPT, this blending of these different AI technologies is going to make it extremely easy to do things that were traditionally may take many hours. For example, you may have You may use ChatGPT to generate a very powerful prompt for Mid-Journey or Stable Diffusion, which then is output in a very quick form and function, brought into your software editing or your image editing software, and then animated. Recently, I've seen demos where people were going from prompt to 3D gaming environment within 5 or 10 minutes. These are huge leaps where previously it would take many, many hours, if not days or weeks, in order to iterate. And now I believe that proof of concepting is going to take a huge and rapid turn, because previously you had to have some level of experience. Now the experience you need is with these tools, as opposed to having gone to school to learn code or Photoshop or design or what have you. So there's a blending where it's going to give us an opportunity to expand on a skill set that we may not possess today, but we only have a cursory knowledge. And that cursory knowledge will be enough to get you in the door with a lot of these tools.
I've seen quite a bit of discovery around this learning and how we can augment education. I know Khan Academy recently is releasing a special closed beta of something called Khanmigo, where essentially you're reviewing some quiz, and a good tutor, someone that is a teacher, is really, really trying to make sure that the student is pulling the answer out themselves and they aren't getting it for free, right? And so Khanmigo was trained on GPT-4, right? ChatGPT's more upper end AI engine, and it works and behaves like a good tutor would. You can ask for a hint, and it will tell you, what do you think you should do, right? And then you could write something like multiply if you're trying to multiply a fraction with a whole number. And it says that's a good thought, but and then it'll explain about associative property or commutative property, and give you a little bit more insight about why that may not be the right choice, right? And then it will ask you again, or it might start giving you just pieces of information that can start describing to you the solution. And I feel like this is, just one area, and education is obviously big, but you mentioned kind of not having any knowledge about maybe building capital, or not having any information about using a particular program. And that's context that it's accelerating every individual's ability to use whatever software that they have, even small experience with. So like Katya behind us, she uses Blender for 3D design, and she's not a programmer at all. But sometimes she has to do some very routine things, like put a bunch of balls in different positions randomly in order to have a exciting background. And then she has weaknesses with materials, and how materials and reflection and those properties will influence the actual creative output of the rendered scene. And now she can have ChatGPT write her the script, and then by reading it, she can actually see the properties that went into that particular thing. Like, what does a glass material look like? What does a wooden textured material look like? And then she can understand and accelerate her knowledge in some of the things that she just couldn't do before, and there was no tutorial for, right? That's really kind of the big thing. There are tutorials for different topics, but which tutorial do you pick? Which one do you want to read? And does it actually work for you? And with this ability to feed AI, and execute the output of that AI, you get to really truly see,
There's a few things that you touch on. The first one there is that journeyman model. In my previous agency days, people were specialists. They worked in a particular vein. That was their specialty. Might have been content generation, written word, might have been image, might have been video, might have been code. Now you see a blending of that. So one person can now work in a very compressed time frame and deliver any number of assets of high quality. And as the technology evolves, what we're calling prompt engineers will become more and more important. But eventually, we will get to a point where even the interface for the actual intelligence platforms will become ubiquitous. It will be either voice-driven, could be, how you say, gesture-driven. There's a lot of different mechanisms that are still yet to be developed, and that will make this even more seamless. It's sort of like using an iPhone. Nobody knows how very few people know how an iPhone works. But when you pick it up, you touch the screen, you can make a call, FaceTime, play an app, whatever it is. Most people don't care about what's behind that. They just understand that the appliance works. And that's going to happen with AI. This democratization of these tool sets will turn everyone from a layman into either a specialist or at least a journeyman.
I think that's kind of really huge in my day-to-day work. Just over the years of experience that I've had, I find that getting a little bit of skill in a lot of different areas is just generally helpful for timelines and productivity. Not having to rely on people is really awesome, because people are going to be busy and do their own things, and having the ability to not get blocked is super, super, special. I just say
It's valuable.
it's valuable. It is something that is incomparable, perhaps, and I feel like I've met many people with this mentality of wanting to get specialized and really, really good in particular areas, and I kind of feel like the world is not.
Why limit
they're not
yourself?
ready. They're not ready for a world that's just based on one particular application of their skill set, and almost all of the greatest inventions have been solved by people that were multidisciplinarians, people that were generalists or had knowledge in multiple fields and were able to combine those two fields in a new way that was not done before by people who were specialized in the particular area.
If you're a critical thinker and an artist, it's a combination, right? A left brain, right brain type of scenario. When you have the opportunity then to remove the abstraction from the difficulties of using a particular medium or a tool, and you let somebody actually explore or create or invent without the burden of necessarily understanding every mechanic, it's liberating. But it also begs the question, who understands what's happening in that black box? And that's one of the issues that we have to sort of tackle as AI becomes more and more, an everyday sort of occurrence. Because at some point, we don't know how these things work. I equate it actually to the blue laser that's in a Blu-ray player. People don't understand actually the mechanic of how the bits are recorded in a Blu-ray. We're exploiting a quantum mechanic that we don't understand. And at this point, we have enough knowledge to harness that. But with AI, it's a lot to digest. We don't know what's happening. We are able to model it, we're able to improve it, but we still don't have a firm understanding of a lot of underlying mechanics of where this will go. And as we reach, if you think about Reed's law, which states that every user brought to a network doubles its intrinsic value. As AI becomes more and more ubiquitous and useful and open to the general public, that's going to add a lot more value. It's going to add a lot more training to these models at a pace that's unprecedented. And so when we see these rollouts of iterations, ChatGPT was 4 months ago, 3.5 was 3 months ago, 2 months ago, now 4 is weeks old. I mean, we're really starting to see this iterative pattern, leaps and bounds and exponential growth in this hockey stick of what's happening. And this is only one model, remember. There are multiple models that are being worked on. And the combination of those models will bring an absolute just treasure trove of opportunity, not only to make money, but to actually cause harm. And so we have to figure out how are we going to tackle some of these more difficult questions.
I know that there are a couple things there. One is AI will probably be used to look at a data set, right? There will be specific AIs that are trained on just referencing a database of known information, like statistical, like World CIA Factbook. Wolfram Alpha has quite a bit of different sources, right? So just like what is true and what is not. And I also feel like the amount of quality and kind of factual information will grow based on how much is now stuck in people's heads that they can't write out because it takes them a long time to actually get their ideas
like
on paper,
oral history or
not necessarily oral
or...
history, but like experimental history, Like if you are a physicist and you work on different systems, the amount of research papers that you've published probably is a fraction of the total knowledge base that you have, just because it's work. Everyone has a certain
A
amount
paper
of
has an end
energy
goal,
and
and the methodology
capabilities.
to get there may not be as important, right?
Right, right. And we're probably going to see more and better quality knowledge. And also, even PhDs, for example, are probably going to start aiming higher, with their contribution to the world, because they now have a system that can get them, some bigger ideas and find gaps, in research that haven't been, discovered before, and also help them along with areas that they might not have experience with. Again, backing up kind of the gap in their knowledge set. But I do expect that there will be systems that are trained on looking at just pieces of information and then trying to break down what is the source of that information. And there are probably going to be more jobs in the industry for training specialists, like people that are specifically looking at data, or at least looking at the model that is looking at the data, and then try to
I,
kind of
I feel
clean
like
up.
I feel like that's actually going to be delegated to the masses, right? Well, you may have people that their specialty or their end goal is to classify some of this, but when you have such a wide user base, you're going to be offloading a lot of that and just generally dumping it into the data pool.
But also, users are inherently biased, and so you would be pulling from the inherent bias of people.
And that sort of begs the question: how would you avoid pollution of that data set, or train against biases in the first place?
Well, I think that there is enough actual public research on just the different kinds of biases that people would be able to write their own models for detecting it. And those models are probably going to have to exist in every language where there is information that is fed into these systems, because I know in Germany and France, I heard that ChatGPT was banned because the information that went in was sent to servers in the US. And so there's a whole GDPR and compliance of data problem, with that kind of system itself. And we're probably going to see more and more bans as the data that gets transferred over is unaccounted for and then cannot be cleaned up. Like, people have a right to be forgotten and anonymized, and ChatGPT and the actual engine of feeding data into it, there's no way that you can prove that this data is under your ownership, right? You can feed it anything from anywhere. It could be private information, and so there's no guardrail right now to prevent, that kind of data from being fed in and then into the next model, perhaps when that eventually does come out.
But privacy is going to be a huge concern, especially when these tools, at some point, although limited within the chat current interface to browse the web, it has a capability to browse the web. And at that point, the inclusion of personal data would be very hard to discern, right? We need to invent different ways of marking that information, making it unavailable or protected in some cases.
Yeah, that would probably have to be a two-way model. I'm not an expert here, but on the data entry side and then on the data output side, there would have to be some kind of systems for randomization, detection of names and addresses, and systems like that. The problem, of course, is that if the data comes in encrypted, then someone could also find a way to extract it through some kind of a decryption scheme.
So one of the main concerns is about regulation, right? Who's a regulatory body? If this is a technology, maybe it resides in one country or multiple countries if it's in the cloud. What regulations should be appropriate? And recently there was a petition signed by 1,000 technologists, scientists, movers and shakers, Elon Musk, the WAS.
Not a lot of validation, though, on the entry side, though.
Of course. But the idea of that we should be solving some prerequisite questions and hurdles before we take this too much farther down the line. Do you believe that we've let the genie out of the bottle? Is it too late to begin the process of actually controlling this, especially if you consider state actors or private homebrews?
I think if we're going to go there, I'll start with what's already available. Models that are very close to GPT-4 that can run on a local computer are already out there. I believe one is called Vicuna. And essentially, yeah, on your own computer, you can run a model that is almost as good as GPT, and you don't need a network connection, right? And so Genie in a bottle type situation is kind of already released. And I think the big thing that people are afraid of, I mean, there's multiple things to be afraid of, but right now ChatGPT is just guessing the next word. But people are, malicious people will always try to find ways to hurt people with whatever is available at their disposal, right? You get rid of guns, you have cars, big trucks, parades. You have, ChatGPT. If you want to connect it to a system that can bully people online automatically or flame different factions of, the
Sure.
US in order to
Automated
divide.
troll farms.
Yeah, automated troll farms. Perhaps this was already a thing, right?
No comment.
Yeah. But I feel like stopping it right now will not really help us. I think really we should be putting energy into, I guess, detection, but that itself is even more difficult of a problem than GPT itself, because the detection has to now generate multiple results in order to have some kind of a parity with the original model, because there's randomization in the model, right? You don't always get the same result with the exact same prompt. So guessing the prompt's number one, guessing variations of prompt number two, it takes like 10 times or 100 times more energy to guess if it's AI than it is to actually generate the content in the first place. So I don't know.
It's okay. I don't know either. I think very few people, if anybody, knows, right? And that's kind of the new frontier. I felt a similar. I'm an old person, and I felt the similar excitement in 1993, 1992, when the web was not even really commercially viable yet. I felt the same excitement with Flash, right? Where there were opportunities that this is going to be groundbreaking. It is groundbreaking, and what's definitely changed here is in any one of those cases, there was a large investment of time, learning, understanding. That is also going away with the ease of use. And so we now have a tool which is not bottomless, but it has a very deep potential for improving not only day-to-day agency life or tools or availability to improve our clients' lives, their output, but generally society as a whole, right? As we begin to see this democratization of just almost an infinite amount of technology inputs, especially when you open it up with the plug-in architecture that's been announced. It will redefine how we live, just as the internet redefined how
And
we
to
live.
give our viewers a little bit of insight there on the plugin side, essentially the plugins for ChatGPT are these little, say, systems that are built by third parties, say Expedia, right, or hotels.com, that will allow you to ask those systems questions, and those systems will then feed that information back into ChatGPT so that you can get real information. So if you're booking a trip, it's not just going to make some stuff up. It can actually look at, flight prices and hotel prices and car rental prices based on the data that's available from those external systems, depending on the plugins that you enable. And that'll essentially make ChatGPT connected and integrated with almost everything else that exists online.
A virtual concierge, which with an unlimited access to language comprehension, to intonation, to nuance, and that's something that is very difficult to ascertain. And if you think about the advent of certain technologies that have come and gone or are still being developed, because there are hurdles, this is one of the smoothest rollouts that we've seen. Again, it's a very easy, natural approach to solving your problems. And even though you may not know about how to ask the right coded, keyworded questions, your intention can be gleaned from the system, and then either a follow-up response can help focus that, or through iteration, you can get to what you really wanted. So when you have these opportunities, this concierge, if you will, you'll be able to book that ticket and your flights, the hotel rooms, in an itinerary that is just spoken with a price, and then whether or not do you want me to book it or not, and everything will be connected. So keep your credit card in your wallet and not online.
I feel like in those cases, you're just going to get an affiliate link out to the system, and
Shout
they're
out
just
every
going to put
Mundo.
in. I don't think credit card processing is something that they're going to build in. That's just too much of a vector for attack. I don't think they want to put that on their plate, but yeah,
But
I mean,
Expedia might, right? So if your ChatGPT logs into your Expedia account and then you give it the keys to the kingdom, we'll see. Apple's unified password system. There may be some
yeah,
sort of
passkey.
interactivity that happens. We don't know yet, but that's what's exciting to think about.
Let's go talking about the agency life
Oh,
again.
all
Some
right.
of the things that we find troubling, things that are hard. What are hard problems? To me, I think documentation is one of the hard problems. Not because it's difficult, but because it's expensive and time consuming to build really good documentation on things. How does AI help with something like that?
Whether it's customer facing or internal code documentation with very detailed commenting and routine descriptions, both of those can be automated. So you can actually describe a task, and ChatGPT will not only spit out the code you might need, but you can give it a reference to say, please include robust commenting on what's happening within these routines. And just a prompt like that itself will fill in those blanks.
This is bringing up another kind of major point. There are some projects that we don't want to touch. And part of that is they are written in a language that we don't have experience with or a framework that we haven't worked on before. Sometimes it's so messy that unpacking it itself is more than the client is willing to pay in discovery. And these are things that we can now feed into the AI, right? Granted, getting permission from the client is necessary for things that are non-public, but being able to take some spaghetti and then make sense of it, have a system make sense of it, really, really makes our jobs easier at scoping and also migration, right? The idea that a project that's written in a particular way can be quickly understood. We can create a really good plan instead of kind of risking it, right? This is always a problem. Do you want to risk taking on unknowns in a project? Sometimes there's no room for discovery, sometimes there's no budget for it, and the timing might not be there, or you don't have all the resources that are, available that understand that level of technology or the framework itself. And giving that to clients as a value add is just really cool. Just being able to really understand their project really quickly, understand what was written prior, to our engagement, and then prepare a plan, a cohesive plan to kind of take on the project and do, right by them is something that we're always kind of looking for. We're always looking for what next, because there are always boring areas in development, right? Whether it's documentation or understanding form or code base and migration, right? And now we have access to tools that basically make all those monotonous chores almost pleasant to work with. It's almost pleasant.
It's like magic.
It's like just like, I don't understand this, and then like it's a game. Now I understand it. It only took a few minutes.
Yeah, and things will go faster. Things will go with less errors. That doesn't mean that we don't need to still have oversight and ensure that the output is not only what was expected, but is actually correct. So again, they bring up that hybrid model. From a translation standpoint, it's one of those things that, again, will become second nature. Think the Babelfish, right? Where it's just something that will innately perhaps come to a near screen device on your face that is actually putting out maybe an audible version of that language that only you can hear. So those types of scenarios are great. From a client perspective, clients are really interested in results. And after feeding in, let's say, a Google Analytics data dump, the AI itself may be able to point out things that a seasoned marketer would see, but someone who may be more or less nascent to objectively looking at those reports wouldn't be able to identify. So on a low level, you'd be able to get some very quick strategic and tactical advantages. that'll tell you, hey, these are areas that you should pay more attention to, or this particular item is out of weight with the rest of your offerings. And so you have these advantageous ideas from an early moving, early adopter as an agency to be able to parlay. So you may not need that business intelligence guru to now read those reports and provide you with those trends, but feed the data set into an AI, which can then give you very sound reasoning on ways to attack or improve your time on site, your conversion rate, whatever it happens to be your goal.
That brings up this kind of foundational point of knowledge that I have, and that is the more mistakes you make, the faster you learn. And AI lets you make mistakes much faster because it lets you try an idea faster, right? Going back to documentation, not having to read too much documentation to have some workable proof of concept, iterating, right? Having a very fast iteration cycle. It's how we learn, right? The slower it takes for us to see the result of our feedback, our entry, our kind of attempt at changing the result, the faster we can see that didn't work, let's try something else. And that feeds into this idea of attention, right? These systems are built on the idea of attention, right? Focusing attention on specific things more than others, building parameters around that, and then you have a model that's really good at guessing the next word and formulating really cool sentences that sound all plausible, even if they are hallucinating. And that's another thing. We have a limited amount of attention. Our lives are finite. And the more time that we spend on really thinking and less time we spend on wrangling data, writing some documentation, even writing tests for systems that have to be resilient and robust, are things that we now have access to more of. Quality attention to really focus and work on problems that are hard, that require more thinking, which will unlock more prompting capabilities in all of us and unlock more abilities to learn faster.
Or in some cases, the quality of life will be increased, right? Because you won't be working so much, you will be enjoying life. You'll be finding other ways. Maybe you'll be creatively using AI to develop a new painting technique. Maybe you will be creating that painting technique on your own through manual trial and error because you have time to do that. So it is again, at the end of the day, it's a tool. It needs to be recognized as something that it could easily become a crutch. And we see that in the discussions about schoolwork. You mentioned the Khan Academy, but these tools are already passing every major standardized test, whether it's the bar, becoming a doctor, the SAT, ACT type of scenarios. So now when we're teaching, we have to understand that it becomes more and more about fundamentals. And you can input a grammatically incorrect text and have the AI rewrite it and give it to you spelt and grammatically correct. But what does that person take away from that? So those types of scenarios where people may be beleaguered writing, for example, you may now be able to say, I had an idea for a short children's book, which was recently published in AI. The pictures were generated in AI. The gentleman actually published the book as a one-off and was the first AI generated publication. So here's the creation of artwork where there wasn't this sort of marrying of a deep philosophical or even intellectual exercise, where now it became something that was created on a whim. And you can use that not only for work, but for extracurricular activities.
And that feeds into a segue. I have used ChatGPT to plan recipes for dinner parties and just generally improve on some of those kind of other skills that I have on the side outside of work.
How were the dishes?
I don't know. I think they were good. I remember they were exactly as I expected, maybe would be a better answer. And that might be good enough. Right?
Yeah.
Because I think outside of that is just understanding more core cooking techniques of balancing flavors and stuff like that. But aside from that, I kind of wanted to segue into the layoffs that we're seeing in the tech industry. And What do you think AI might have to do with that, if anything?
I think ultimately we've seen huge explosions of tech teams, um, and there will be a pulling back from that. Again, you won't need 10,000, excuse me, 10,000 engineers. You might need a few hundred, and in some cases, you may only need one. The next best thing is being worked on right now, and whether or not that needs a scalable team is not really written in stone. So we've often brute forced ourselves into solutions because it took a lot of human potential in order to realize that. And now we're able to see that maybe not today, but in the very near future, we will have tools that will write the tools. And it's going from a technologist standpoint, we
I
really
mean,
have to
we're
understand.
definitely there. Yeah, I'm writing the tools. I'm using AI to write the tools.
I write the songs, you write the tools. Exactly. So have you is there an opportunity then for an agency to leverage this with a smaller team? Absolutely. Will every agency leverage this? They will be at some point. Whether they officially sanction it or not, it could be somebody who's just in their cubicle and using it to write their email copy on the side, whether it's publicly available knowledge or not, it's happening. Or it could be on a grander scale where people are maybe prospecting jobs for the agency, looking
There are
for.
already AI job finders that just kind of like take your criteria, match it against, a variety of jobs, fit, location, right, job requirements, and those kinds of things. And I mean, I'm sure the reverse is happening where there are systems that will analyze candidates and then not just look for specific
Keywords.
strict keywords,
Yeah.
but will actually try to balance it based on effort, right, involved in the creation of the resume and other factors that are just we didn't have the time for. And
Well,
then
think of it
factor in.
cross-referencing, right? So if you were to provide just a resume and you got a keyword score and they moved you to the top of the pile, maybe those selects are then cross-referenced with LinkedIn. Was what they put on their resume reflected in a LinkedIn? Oh, now we can actually branch out and see if their connections within LinkedIn are actually connections within those companies. Maybe they were people that worked there 6 years ago.
You
and
could probably even have the system
Fraud
build the
detection.
criteria that you yourself use when you're investigating candidates.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, like, is this person associated with any of these groups on LinkedIn? Is their GitHub profile more than one public repository that hasn't been forked? Whatever criteria you may
Guilty.
have, you can, right, ask. And you could probably build a tool for that. And
Probably somebody's working on it, right? That's one thing that I took away from early agency life. If you and I are talking about it, somebody's already working on it, right? We might be smart individuals, but we're only two, and so when you expand that
are we
footprint,
though, too?
maybe we're four.
Glasses,
Yeah.
doubling.
Well, it's my hologram or your hologram. That's the question. So in those cases, very often it's that frame of mind where you say, you know what, I was just thinking about that, and here it is, right? So it certainly there are people working on this, especially if it's their specialty, if it's their how they earn their cheddar. Somebody's working on it.
How do you think this changes the way that business owners see their business and how they decide to put energy into certain directions for the business itself?
It's really difficult to be a business owner, especially if you are on a small footprint, because you're often asked to wear uncomfortable hats, whether that's the finance, the HR. Maybe you enjoy the client interfacing, but you don't enjoy the actual, in our case, development or creative process. So you have to be able to be agile and a generalist, right? For a good business person. As we bring AI into the mix, they will be able to maybe pursue their interests more. So a baker may be a fantastic baker. They may bake the best cakes and cookies, but that doesn't mean that they're a good business owner. And so it's not often that someone who is a baker should open a bakery. When you look at these opportunities with AI, you now have the opportunity of just leveraging some universal information that will make every baker, in this case, have an equilateral playing field to information, technology, techniques. Like we talked about raising capital. We talked about finding equipment, whatever it happens to be, whatever it's not your specialty, you'll be able to do that faster and quicker.
That brings up interesting points. Like if you're a baker and you don't even know how to lay out the bakery itself for optimal traffic and flow and merchandising of certain goods.
Feng shui.
Right. Also just general layout. You have to position certain things in certain places. They take up a certain number of, amount of room, right? We're probably going to see systems in place that are going to take floor plans with requirements, and they're just going to automatically create positioning for all of the elements. That'll probably not just apply to simple things like bakeries. It'll probably replace or augment the interior designers,
Of course.
Wiring mechanics, and people that are doing internal networking installations and stuff like that.
Even vehicle development, right? What's the most economical way to build, or what's the most opportunistic way to
It raises the
fashion?
bar really on every industry. Whoever it is, the bar is raised just a little
Or
bit.
will
And
be.
for those power users, it's even more raised. It's like it's multiplied.
And that's where we get into the use, right? The ease of use. And as these technologies really come to our kitchen tables, our watches, our phones, then the interfacing and how that output is generated, it's like Voltron, right? Like Voltron without an arm, it's still pretty powerful. But once you put both arms on Voltron, now you have like an unbeatable super robot. And here, I'm not saying it's going to be super unbeatable, but the more tools that we interface with, the more that the output is going to become useful, will become easier to use in most cases, and will generally improve walks of life. Or, for example, let's think about farming and agriculture. We already know that very sophisticated farming operations exist where all of the tractors are GPS driven. They run on a route. They work on sensors that tell you the opportune time to collect. Now, even
We also have image technology for just automatically spraying
right
wherever
as
they
opposed
match in the
to
image versus the entire thing
crop.
collectively.
Yeah. So now having all of those systems combined and literally running these behind the scenes becomes more of a I don't say one man operation, but you may have a mechanic who has to ensure that the mechanical equipment is running correctly. You may have a product specialist who's ensuring that the product is what you want, and you may have a buyer or a seller. So maybe all of that is being done by AI.
That actually flows into another area that I've seen before, complexity simplification, right? So we may have an idea from a programmatic perspective to say that a routine must look like this in order to solve a particular business problem. And now we can feed that into ChatGPT and generative pre-trained models like it and have it simplify for us, find patterns that we didn't see and simplify. And I feel like there's so much technology now today that is so complicated because the engineers didn't know any other way.
Right.
Because they were missing pieces of information.
Or the iterations were so difficult,
see,
that it wasn't next to impossible to do in a manual process.
Right. Or the expertise wasn't there to simplify further, right? I think I've heard a quote once, I don't remember if it was World War I UK. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but I think he said something like, if I had more time, this letter would be shorter. Something like that. Like,
Brilliant.
just...
Yeah.
It takes time to make things simple.
Sure.
And make them really nice. And we might probably see simplification in hardware and operations and maintenance, because as AI fills in the gaps for a lot of roles that don't have those expertise and experience, then we're going to see technology come out and products come out that are better.
I agree. And talking about products getting better, how do you see the rollout of AI from a commercial standpoint? So we know that ChatGPT is freely available, but there is a plus for $20 a month.
Bing actually starts to integrate ads right now into the product. So there's an example I saw where you ask something about a particular car, and it will say this car, according to TrueCar, is $25,370, right, on the market, right? And then there's a little ad badge, and you can click on that to go to the TrueCar listing, right? And then the rest of it is the information that you asked for. So it's kind of like a seamless, integrated into the context of the conversation, just
Like
an
Google Ads in
insert.
your Gmail used to be, right? Like
But like instead of just being like
on the
a
side,
record, it's like
part of
integrated
the
into the
content.
email itself content. Yeah. So that's what I'm seeing.
Well, ethically, like as long as it gets it's tagged, but at some point maybe it's not going to be tagged, or there will be factors. But
I mean, it could be trained on data that is an ad.
for
right?
example, Jasper AI is another language based tool for writing and creating written word. Like these types of precursors, what happens with them? Will they, in an iterate or die scenario, are we going to be losing large swaths of existing technological advancements, or do you believe that they'll continue to iterate and pose challenges? And what will an AI battle of the future look like?
Well, I think they should adapt or die, and I think if they're not already using it, they should be. I think that there are probably ChatGPT is not the end all be all LLM that we have seen, and there will probably be more. And it's possible that the open source models that you can run on your computer will be 90% as good, and people will prefer it versus running something in the cloud versus feeding private company data into a black box, right? Versus your local black box that at least doesn't send that information out for additional training. And do I know what the next AI battle will look like? Hell no. Hell no.
Oh.
So
what happens when Boston Dynamics powers their impressive robotics with some sort of an AI engine for either communication or decision making?
I feel like this is an interesting one. If vision grows in a technological way, then I'll see Boston Dynamics implementing and integrating more computer vision tech in terms of controlling human interfaces, right, that were built for an operating system or a warehouse management system or something like that. But if that doesn't, grow fast enough, then I feel like text-based interfaces might make a comeback.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Zork.
So yeah, like if you have a warehouse management system for processing, in a particular way, right, that text-based model is the thing that will be fed into these language learning models. And so the robot can instead of using a mouse, it'll just use keystrokes, right, to basically give input for what it needs to do, the intention.
Think about a technology like stenography, right, where you actually have somebody writing in a specialized language, shorthand, where two machines could be inventing their own shorthand, whether it's a warehouse picker or a color-based software system, an image compression technique. Who knows? I mean, that at some point there could be shortcuts that are being made by two sets of software that are interfacing that we may never have dreamed about or even authorized.
Well, I don't know if that would come from large language models, because that level of AI would essentially be almost AGI, right? Artificial general intelligence, where they understand that the bandwidth for communication is slow. Or, I mean, when we talk, we have to breathe, right? We have to move body parts in order to have sounds come out, and this is a waste of time and energy. And so those vocalizations, the bit rate, the density of the English language will probably be something that these intelligent systems in the future that are trying to optimize their own communication are probably going to find a different language for, right? We're probably going to see that. So I think that was a wild ride, friend. That was a wild ride.
It's so interesting. I really feel like we needed beer for this.
I think so. Next time. Next time. So, I mean,
Do
I
we
hope
put that
our
in the
viewers.
budget?
Yes, I think so. We can fit that in. I hope our viewers enjoyed this short little fireside chat with our fireside blue lighting and awards in the background. I'm your host for this episode, Georgiy, and my guest, Joshua.
Nicely done,
Fantastic, as for the first time. Fantastic, right?
I enjoyed every minute of it.
Oh,
I laughed, I cried. It was much better than Cats.
yeah. Cool. Well, thanks. See you next time.